Madison.
All right, here we go. Oh, I was like, oh, this is really about to take a long time.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Madison, did you want to start?
Sure, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not able to see all the participants, so I wish I could see you all coming in. But hi, y'all. My name is Maddie. I am going to be the moderator today, so I'll introduce Jody, and then at the end, just remind y'all to take the evaluation, which I believe Jody had in her presentation, but if not, I have the link too. And so welcome to Can I Send My Student to You? This is Jody McDougall. You're from University of Central Arkansas, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. And then I will let you take it over, and I am actually going to be guiding the PowerPoint for Jody since we were having some technical difficulties. So Jody, just whenever you need me to go to the next slide, just let me know.
All righty. Thanks so much, Madison. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Jody McDougall. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently in my final year at the University of Central Arkansas, and I'm here to ask you that big question, can I send my student to you? So, Maddie, if you want to pull that up, I don't know if you guys can see the screen. I cannot see the screen. Okay. Thanks so much for your patience, y'all. We did have some technical difficulties coming in, but we're going to move past it. That's what being a housing professional is all about, being flexible and being adaptable. So we're excited. Okay, so I'm here asking y'all that big question, can I send my student to you? Thank you so much for coming and being willing to challenge yourself and ask yourself, can students be sent to you? We can go on to the next question, Maddie. Okay, so I wanted to lay a foundation and tell you about why we're here. I'm sorry, a lot of my graphics are gone, so this is going to look like a really plain presentation, but I'm going to try to liven it up a little bit. So, why I created this, very transparent moment. This last summer, in the height of everything that was going on in the Black Lives Matter movement, as a product of now two predominantly white institutions, I was really looking for some of my mentors, faculty, and staff to say something about everything that was happening. They loved me and my Blackness when I was recruiting for their program, or when I was giving their tours, or when I was working in their res halls, but not when my Black life mattered. And I sat down and talked to some people that I had close relationships with, and I asked them directly, like, hey, where were you? And a lot of them said very plainly, I just didn't know what to say. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. I didn't want to be offensive. But in that moment, having heard something to know that you cared about me would have been helpful. So that goes on to my next point. Why did I make this about entry-level professionals? So we're going to be the next people that people are looking to. If you don't already have people looking and asking you questions and expecting to hear something from you when stuff hits the fan, it's coming. I wanted to start from the bottom up. So I don't know if y'all know this, but nationwide, 70% of college and university presidents and chancellors are men. 80% are white. So that is the people that we have going out representing all of our students. I absolutely love my current university president, but he is a representative of me. But does he directly represent me as a Black female student? So we have to talk about our role as representatives, but also as advocates. So in those identities that you don't connect with directly, how are you still going to advocate for those students? Okay, we can go on to the next slide, Maddie. Okay, so we talked about why I created this, but let's talk about why you're here. So I have a few learning outcomes for you. The Kuho professionals and paraprofessionals will be able to acknowledge their own biases and privileges and understand how they can use these to benefit their student population. So some of us were born with the privileges that we have. Some of us have acquired privileges, but we all have some privileges and some biases. How are we going to use those to benefit our students that we're serving? SWCUO participants will be challenged to learn more about the needs of minority and underserved students outside of the classroom, specifically in housing. As far as I know, everybody here is a housing officer. So, how are you going to use your current role to help these students that are not always in the spotlight? And lastly, SWCUO participants will have the skills, SWCUO participants will have the skills to create a plan to serve students of varying identities. So we're not necessarily going to sit here and start to finish build a program for you to put on next month or next semester. But I want you to have an idea of an identity or a student group that you don't necessarily belong to, but that you still want to show that you value. Okay, we can go to the next one, Maddie. All right, so I want you to think of some of your identities. Ignore that last line, but think of some of your identities. Take about 2 minutes and write down as many, we'll do about 1 minute since we're short on time, and write down as many identities of yours as possible. So definitely use those census questions, those demographics, race, gender, age, socioeconomic status, but also think outside of that box. A few identities that I would think of. I'm a North Carolinian. I am the oldest child. I'm right-handed. I am a plant mom. So think about some of those things. Some of those outside identities, y'all can put them in the chat. I would love to know who's in my session, learn more about you, what some things that you identify with. I'll set a timer for about 60 seconds and allow y'all to write those down. I'm going to write with you, actually. Okay, so our minute is up. Feel free to put those identities in the chat. I would love to see what y'all are thinking, who you are, what you're about. But if you have on your list white, male, Christian, cisgender, heterosexual, or able-bodied, yeah, feel free to drop it in the chat. You can put like some of the identities that you wouldn't usually think of. So if you have a dog, if you're a student, if you're a son or a daughter, if you're a biker, a runner, put those in the chat. I would love to learn more about y'all. But to keep y'all on time, put an X next to these following identities: white, male, Christian, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied. If you have any of those on your list, you are absolutely still here where you're still being talked to, but today we're not going to talk so much about you. When you go to these broad conferences and hear about topics that are just talking about students or talking about college life, usually these are the people that we're talking about. We want to talk about these other groups, these groups that are not included here, these groups that are not the societal norm. Okay. Next slide, Maddie. Okay, so I just want to lay a theoretical foundation for y'all. Where did I get this from before we get too deep into it? So a big part of this, we just talked about our identities. Let's talk about establishing identity. So Arthur Chickering says, this development establishes how an individual is perceived by others. Ultimately, the formation of one's identity leads to the sense of contentment with one's self and how that self is seen by others. So before a student even gets to our campus, as soon as a high school senior is admitted into our program, we start blowing up their inbox. We start sending them stuff in the mail. They start joining all these group chats and hashtags on social media saying they're a pirate, a bear, an Aggie, a panther, a wolf, whatever your mascot may be. And we put this identity on them. But realistically, they have identities before they even get to us. So, is our community showing that we are inclusive of the communities that they're already bringing to the table, the identities that they're already coming with? Are the identities that we're giving them, are those, does a bear, does a pirate, does a wolf, does an Aggie, do those encompass all of the other identities that your student has? And this is absolutely my favorite. If you know Chickering 7 vectors, this is my favorite vector. You can get through the first 4. You can have the last 2. But if you do not have this establishing identity vector, if you are not establishing identity in your community, you're hitting a wall. All right, next slide, Maddie. I love these identities y'all have put in here. Dog owner, able-bodied, cisgender, black, female, lesbian. We love to see those. We'll see how these play a part as we're going on. So I'm asking that big question, can I send my student to you? That is a loaded question. How am I supposed to know? Well, here are a few indicators. These are 3 big things that I would look for when asking my colleagues, can I send my student to you? Who you are, what are your outward privileges, and how are you using them? What do you say? The language and the context that you use. What do you do? Who you associate with? What do you do with your time and your space? So we're going to break these 3 things down and see, well, what do they mean? Okay. Nice. Okay, cool. So the very first one, who you are, what are your identities, what are your outward privileges and biases? If y'all can see this, you might have to squint a little. I call this the privilege wheel. We know from Isaac Newton that every action has an opposite and equal reaction. Well, identities work the same way. Every group in power, every dominant group or every privileged group has a recessive or oppressed group. For one group to have power, they had to have taken it from another. So look at this and look at the wheel in total and find your identities on there. These might be identities that you listed, these might be identities that you didn't even think of, and kind of find yourself on the wheel. So up top we see male, white, European heritage, Anglophones or English speakers, attractive, young, upper middle class. If you kind of connect that line all the way down, you see the opposite end of that spectrum, the opposite group. If you see that a lot of your identities are on the top, or if a lot of your identities are on the bottom, that's absolutely okay. One identity that we all absolutely share, one privilege that we all absolutely have sitting here, is that middle, that center line up top, credentialed. And on the opposite side of that is non-literate. But one thing that I want you to notice about the top half is there are all of these isms that are connected to it. How are you outwardly interacting with people that are not credentialed or not in that dominant group? So when I was doing my research for this, it really checked me. I really had to do some internal processing, some challenging of my own. But that's what this is all about. This is absolutely acknowledging your own privileges and biases. When I did that, I noticed that I am absolutely an educationalist. I come from a family that highly values education. I surround myself with college educated people. I work on a college campus. And I was outwardly saying, this is what I want in my life. This is who I associate with. But just because those are the people that exist near me, there are also grown, functioning adults in my society, in my community, that cannot read on a first grade level, realistically. So for me to be exclusive and say, oh, I'm not going to interact with them, oh, I want no parts of them, is not me doing my due diligence as an educator. That is not allowing myself to say, okay, Jody, this is what your privilege is. How are you going to help somebody else? So I now am working to find ways to help people on the opposite side of the spectrum. And maybe you don't have to go as far as non-literate, but there are people, you might have friends. I now have friends that are working to go back to school after years of taking break after high school. How do I encourage them? How can I use my credentials, my educationalism to help them move forward? All right, Maddie, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so that's your who you are. What are you going to do with the role that you have? Now let's talk about what you say. Simply using a misnomer or an outdated term is enough to make a student feel unseen or even unworthy of your time. And as crazy as that sounds, it's very true. A lot of us here might say, okay, this is my identity. I stand firm in it. You're not going to get it wrong. I recently heard a friend of mine be misgendered, and she was very quick to politely correct them. But we have some students that might be misgendered and might shrink and say, okay, I'm just going to go with it because this person is in that dominant group and they have a power over me. They are the societal norm. So, what are you going to do in your role to make people feel comfortable? I did have a video clip, but I don't think it's going to share with y'all today. But it was just explaining a few words that you might not have known had historic and racist origins. A lot of terms that we use today that we just use willy-nilly came from a place it had not so humble beginnings. For example, did you know that using the word handicap came from the idea that people with mobility deficiencies could not go to work, so they sat on the side of the street begging and took their hat off their head and held it in their hand asking for money, thus handicap. Did you know that hip hip hooray came from the Nazi term when rounding up Jews and raiding Jewish ghettos saying hep hep hurrah? Terms like using gypped. Oh, I was gypped. I was scammed. They played me. Did you know that came from that is a slur to the Romani people? We even hear my big fat gypsy wedding. That's a slur toward the Romani people. But a lot of people, because we use it, we hear it all the time in our everyday. We don't think about how it could affect someone that is actually a part of that group. All right, Maddie, we can go on to the next. Okay, and along with that, with using that vocabulary, we have to also think about how we actually are piecing our words together. So when we're talking about our students, when we're talking about a group of people, are we using these blanket statements? Are we using stereotypes? Stereotypes are usually based in assumption. They're generally negative, sweeping, and simple. And they're often characterized with words like always or never. So a very broad example of a stereotype is people from country X are always rude, or people from country X never make eye contact. How do you know that? Have you met every person from country X? Have you always had rude interactions and have they never made eye contact with you? No, you have not had. That is too broad. That is literally putting everybody that belongs to that group under that stereotype. Instead, we want to use generalizations. Generalizations, on the other hand, are based in those lived experiences. They are not necessarily negative, but they can be. They're helpful and intended to guide people's actions. They're complex. People are the most complex thing in the world. These are people that you're dealing with. And they usually use terms like often, sometimes, sorry, I can't read that. And maybe. So an example of a generalization is people from country X often or tend to use indirect communication style. Then you can go on further to say people from country X tend not to make eye contact out of respect for their elders, maybe. That not only gives cultural context, now we have an understanding of maybe why they operate the way that they do, but that leaves room for individual difference. If you said that every black girl can dance, I could get up right now and I could prove to you that that is in fact not the case. That's a stereotype. But you're leaving space, using generalizations leaves space for several people to live their own different lives. All of these identities that we talk about today are not monolithic. Lived experiences make a person. All right, Maddie, you can head to the next page. All right, so I'm going to teach you today how to CYA. If you don't know what CYA is, here's a picture right there. We're going to talk about 5 ways to CYA when speaking with them. Focus on your student, not the characteristics. If we're housing professionals here. If a student is being sent to us, more than likely, they're not being sent to us solely because of the identities that they have. They're probably being sent to us for something housing related. So do your job, help that student troubleshoot, ask them why they're in your office, but be aware of the other characteristics that they're coming in with. Use gender neutral pronouns. A lot of times we hear, okay guys, let's get started. Guys, ladies, using those gender specific pronouns, those gender specific languages can be awkward. I have students in my complex that have transitioned since being here, are gender nonconforming, are questioning their identity in that way. So I like to use terms like team, family, community, because that's absolutely what we are here in Utah. Use universal language. This is something that I had not thought of actually before really working with international students. Here at UCA, we have a large international student population, and I love the opportunity to work with them and learn things from them. So, for example, if you say, you did such a great job, you hit that ball out of the park, a non-American student or even a domestic student that is mobility deficient, or a domestic student that just doesn't know anything about the game of baseball, that phrase, you hit the ball out of the park, can be confusing or even just not mean anything to them. So use universal language. You did such a great job. That program was amazing. Go into detail on why they did such a great job, why their program was amazing. Use growth mindset. Be aware that things change. We just talked about those phrases that we use in our everyday that had historic origin. I was talking to my sister, and when I first created this program a few months ago, I used the term LGBT, and I stopped there. And she said, Jody, when you use that, you now have to say LGBTQIA+ to encompass everybody. And immediately I took note, and if you ever hear me speaking on that, you will hear me saying LGBTQIA+. Things change every day. Society is changing. So be willing to change with it. Ask for clarification. Build that relationship with your residents, with your colleagues, with your peers, to be able to ask them, hey, is this what you would like me to refer to you as? What pronouns do you use? In my email signature, when I sat down to talk to y'all today, I introduce myself with my pronouns. When I sit down to talk to my students, I introduce myself with my pronouns. That not only allows them the space to refer to me directly, but us the space for me to do that to them, and for us to have conversation about it. What would you prefer to be called? Would you prefer I use your name? How can I refer to you in context? Ask for clarification so you don't mess it up. All right, Maddie, we can go to the next page. Okay, so we're going to talk about that last thing, what you do. If you have not heard it before, you're going to hear it today. You live in a fishbowl. In your role as a housing professional, people are seeing you. I have definitely been outside, and I have seen a resident, and before they say, this is Jody, they never say my name. It's always, oh my God, that's my RC, that's my RA, that's my advisor, that's my professor, that's whoever. Your name goes out the window and your title is standing in front of them. So remember that you're always being seen. Somebody is always watching. So when you're in your fishbowl, consider these 3 big questions. Who do you interact with? Are you only interacting with faculty, staff, and students that look like you? Or are you interacting with people outside of your normal groups, outside of your normal circles? Are you respectful to staff around campus? When I was an undergrad, I saw a faculty member being so rude to one of the workers in our food court. And though I never would have traditionally crossed paths with them, they were not in my department, I wouldn't have known them any other way. I made it a point for the next few years while I was on that campus to not interact with them because I saw how they treated other people. Next question. Do you only show up for work? When you come into work, are you clocking in, working in your department, only talking to the people in your department, only talking to the students that you work with? Or are you stepping outside of that box? Are you branching out? Are you involved on campus? Are you advising? Are you in any organizations? Are you advising any organizations? I was just telling my friend yesterday, I would not have known this chemistry professor on our campus, but he is one of the SGA advisors here, and I love him, and we see each other, and we spend time together, and I really look up to him, but I would not know him otherwise. But now I have that connection to chemistry students when I'm talking to my students. I have somebody in the chemistry department I can connect you to. I have that connection to him. I know something outside of what I usually would. What did your space look like? Do you sorry, those are the wrong bullets, guys. I apologize. But what did your space look like? What did your office look like? What did your complex look like? Your email signature even. So I said I make a point to use my pronouns in my email signature because that might be the first time a student ever interacts with you. Let them know, hey, this is how I rock. This is how I function. My office is covered with stuff on the walls that is representative of me and the students that I value. So I have Black Lives Matter signs. My building is covered with Black Lives Matter, LGBTQIA+, different cultural flags based on the different ethnicities that we have in our building so that we know that you are valued. And then how do you carry yourself on campus? Do you look approachable? Are you always walking around looking snooty, looking like you have somewhere better to be, have your RBF on? Is that the case? Do students feel like they can come up to you and have conversation with you? Are you open to having conversation with other people on campus, other staff members and faculty members? All right, Maddie, we can push it on. Okay, so we talked about those three big things. We said, okay, this is the privilege, these are the privileges and the biases that I have, these are the identities that I have, this is who I am. We said, okay, this is the vocabulary that I use, this is what I'm going to try to steer away from, this is how I'm going to change my vocabulary as society changes. We talked about what we outwardly do, what we're doing in our fishbowl, who we're interacting with, what our space looks like. So what's next? As housing professionals, I would love to see y'all's ideas for what we can do next, what things you can do in your current role as a housing professional. I have some examples here. Intentional programming. With everything happening with the pandemic, Asian and Asian American students and people nationwide are now facing a heightened case of discrimination every single day. So my RA came to me and said, hey, Jody, we're in the Chinese New Year. We had a 2-week-long program. We're in the Chinese New Year. He sat down and collaborated with the Confucius Institute that we have here on campus and said, I want to talk about the Chinese New Year. I want to celebrate the Chinese New Year. So today is the last day. Today is the Chinese celebration of the Lantern Festival. And we had students around our building coloring pages of Chinese lanterns, and we're going to put them up. And that is simply just us saying, we understand that this is something happening, but there are students in our community that are also celebrating these things. These directly connect to students that we have that we value. And we want to show that we value y'all, that we care about what's happening, that we're educating other students that do not fit those identities. Use that signage. If we're not known for anything else, we're known for our bulletin boards, our door decks, everything that we post up in our hallways around campus. Use that signage. I'm a firm believer of out of sight, out of mind. If you know me personally, if it's not written down, if it's not right in front of me, I'm probably going to forget it. Our students are the same way. Put up that signage. If you really value a student community, put up a sign that says that you value that student community. We have flags up in our building. We have postage up in our building. We might post celebrities and famous inventors, musicians that represent people in those identities. Let them know that we see them, that we value them. Remind them of that. Use social media. If your students were not on their phones before, they definitely are now. So get in there, get in their feed. If they're scrolling on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, why can't y'all be one of the people that they see? Educate them on something. Here in New Hall, we're wrapping up a month-long Black History Month Instagram takeover. We've been posting about Black inventors, Black artists, Black athletes, Black people in Arkansas. We did trivia on our story. Our students are already scrolling through Instagram. They might as well learn something. And then that collaboration with campus offices and organizations. If you, off the top of your head, do not know how to connect your student to someone, where exactly to send them to, I'm sure in 2021, and if not, please let me know, your institution has an office of diversity and inclusion or community or social justice, something to connect people that are of differing identities. So reach out to them, ask them questions, ask them to connect you to student organizations that value students in identities that are not like your own. If you have a lot of students that are part of one identity, part of one student group, connect them with that organization. Let them know that there are other people on campus and around campus with like-minded views that come from the same things. Okay, Maddie, we could go to the next page. All right, so though I am wrapping up my presentation, this is absolutely not the end of your work. I tried to keep it brief with you today, but after you coming here today, we have signed a verbal contract that you are going to continue this shared practice of being better, continuing to challenge yourself and those around you. So we're going to go back to those three big things. Who you are. Continue to ask yourself, how would you challenge your own biases and privileges? How are you putting them to good use? If I know that I am educated, how am I going to help? I'm a third generation educated student. How am I going to help my first generation students who don't have family to call when they don't know what to do, when they're getting overwhelmed with their classes, when they want to be involved but don't know how to juggle academics and involvement? How am I going to use my privilege to help those students? What you say, not only what you say, but what you hear. Call out your students, your colleagues, your faculty, everybody on their mess. If you hear something, let them know, hey, you're coming from a place of learning. We're going to move forward. But what you said, what you did was not okay. And this is why. At one point, you did not know why what you're saying was not right. In my 23 years of living, I thought that only surrounding myself with educated people, or mostly surrounding myself with educated people, was perfectly okay. But it's not, and I had to learn that. So be willing to call them out on their mess, because if you're the only person in your department that is willing to grow and change and challenge yourself, what happens on your sick day? What happens when you're out of town? And lastly, what do? Push yourself to unlearn these things and research new information. It's 2021. We are all logged in on a computer or a device that has access to the internet. Ask those questions. Google will have something. There are TED Talks. There are scholarly articles, Inside Higher Ed, conference sessions that you can go to learn more about groups that you do not identify with. There is no excuse for you to say, I just don't know, and that's okay. Ask those questions, get to know more information on your own, but also be willing to ask those questions to people. I don't care how many articles you read, I don't care how many theories you look up, how many TED Talks you're tuned into. Those are not going to give you everybody's lived experiences. Every identity that we ever talk about, you have to understand, is not monolithic. You could have two students with a list of the same identities, but I can promise you their day-to-day experiences with other people have caused them to not live the same life. So ask those questions. Be willing to have those relationships with people where they can ask you questions too. But understand when to do both. Sometimes you got to ask those questions, but sometimes you have to sit down and you have to say, okay, I'm going to educate myself. I'm going to pull up Google. I don't have a lot of students walking in. I don't have a lot of people coming into my office hours. I don't have a lot of tasks on my desk. I'm going to take a little time to learn about a group that I do not identify with. But then, now that I've learned something, now that I know a little bit more, I'm going to take this to somebody that I know and ask them about their lived experiences. I talk about my sister all the time. She called me out on my LGBTQIA stuff, but now I send my questions to her. I ask her. I open a space for her to be willing to ask me questions. She has educated me. She has checked my privilege, but she is absolutely not the end all be all. I cannot expect her to educate me all the time. I have to educate myself. I have to be willing to learn myself. Okay, Maddie. Thank y'all so much for coming. I want y'all to continue to implement those 3 things and continue to ask yourself those hard-hitting questions. Call people out. Consider who you are, what you say, and what you do, and ask, can I send my student to you? Can people send their student to me? Thank you guys so much for coming and taking time out of your busy Friday and dealing with all my technical difficulties. Here is the assessment form. You can just follow this QR code. Maddie might also drop a link in the chat if you're having issues with that. And fill out an assessment. Tell me how I did. But again, I thank you guys so much for coming. And continue to challenge yourselves. I'll stick around for a little bit. I know we only have about 5 more minutes, but I'll stick around for any questions or anything afterward. Thanks, guys.
Hello, good job. Yay, Jody. That was so great. I loved it. Thank you so much. I am so sorry I could not chat and see anything while I was sharing my screen. So I'm sorry I didn't drop the link, but if someone is still here and needs it, please just let me know. You can type it in the chat and I'll send it.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much, Maddie.
Of course.
That the PowerPoint was all wonky, but
I know, and then I looked on my other device and the pictures were showing up on there. And I was like, what a bummer. I guess I don't have my PowerPoint application updated.
Yeah, so actually, I think I had to. It's okay. I think I actually had to do an update for all of this. So, yes, I will send this out. If you guys can drop your emails in the link in the chat box, I'll actually write them down and I'll make sure to get them to y'all. My UCA people, I have your emails. But for my other SWACUHO people from other institutions, drop your emails in the chat. Or if you put it here, I guess I can find you elsewhere. But I definitely am willing to share. Thank y'all so much for coming. Perfect. Oh, wow, wow. I love it.
Okay, and then Jody, if you don't mind hanging on, I'm going to get my screenshot of you.
Awesome.
That we will use for social media, just whenever you're ready. But I want to allow time people if they have questions or want to use these last couple minutes too.
Yeah. Did anybody have any follow-up questions? I'm still writing down those emails. Perfect. Thank you guys so much for coming. If you guys use this presentation, let me know. Let me know how your institution, how your community takes it in. I would love to hear feedback. I think I got all the emails. Let me make sure. Oh, and Jules also said something.
And then Jody, do you have the access to the post-presenter survey?
Let me see. I should. Yes, ma'am, I do.
Okay, cool.
Is the link on the checklist PDF? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah, it was on my checklist too, so it should be on yours.
Cool beans. Yep, it
All
opened
right.
for me. Okay.
Awesome.
Did you
And
want
then
to
if you don't,
a screenshot?
yes, please. They asked, I think they wanted your like title slide in it, but I'm gonna get a picture of you and then maybe I can like crop it in or something.
Yeah, I wish it was like a share screen, and then I could get the. If you use my title, so I use the one with the graphics. So they see
Okay, yes, I will. Yes, I'll try and work with it so that they can get y'all up on the website.
For sure. Oh wow, how exciting!
Oh wait. Okay, wait. Ready?
Yes.
1. Cute. Okay, love it.
Thanks. Look very
Awesome.
pro.
Great job.
Thanks so much, Maddie. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
You really helped me today. You held me down.
I feel like I didn't do anything at all, but thank you for, yes, bearing with me through our technical difficulties. But you did an amazing job. Thank you so much for presenting and being willing to share your materials and resources and wisdom. So we so appreciate you. And hopefully I'll get to see you again.
Yes, ma'am. Have a good one.
All right, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye. I guess should we stop broadcast first?